Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Energy Talk podcast. My name is Olubumi Alajide, and today I am so excited because today is our first conversation about nuclear energy, and I can't wait for this conversation. So I'm going to keep this intro very, very short. We're going to be speaking with Brett, and he's going to introduce himself throughout the episode, so you don't have to worry about that. So I'm just going to remind you. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you're listening and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, wherever else you get in this episode. I'll catch you guys at the end and enjoy the wonderful conversation about nuclear energy.
So I'm Bret Kugelmass. My background's actually formerly in mechanical engineering. Did a master's in robotics at Stanford, and then started a drone technology company shortly after that. Grew it for about 5 years, and then when it was acquired in 2017, I decided I wanted to get into the environmental and climate change world. So I started a nonprofit, the Energy Impact Center, and been running that for 2 years now.
Okay. So could you just go a bit deeper into your background in robotics? Because that seems like a pretty, I wouldn't say drastic change, but you spent a lot of your early career in the tech space and to just transition all the way into climate change and especially nuclear energy. How was that for you, and what were the motivations behind that?
Well, let's see. I mean, listen, I started off in robotics because it was fun, right? I was building robots ever since high school. I was part of the first robotics team. That's an international robotics competition. And I mean, I fell in love with it, yeah, as early as high school, and studied mechanical engineering to pursue it, and obviously got a taste of all sorts of other related fields, electrical, computer science, whatever you need to build robots. And then I started my last company because it was fun and it seemed interesting. Drones. I mean, at the time, people didn't have them as toys, as photographic tools. People thought of drones as military devices, but for the first time, the technology was being transferred to the commercial sector in a way that you could now build drones instead of for $20 million for $20,000, and they could do real things and have real applications. The drones that we built were used in construction. We flew over disaster sites after storms and tornadoes and hurricanes, and it was really exciting to be able to take a cool new technology and transfer it to the commercial sector and make it a force for good instead of bad, which is what people perceived of it as at the time, it being formerly a military device. And then building a company that was also fun and interesting and exciting and new challenges. But at some point, your work has to have more than just fun in it. It's got to have purpose. And what I mean, you're probably about my age. How old are you, Olu?
I am 22 years old.
Okay, so you're a lot younger. Okay, so I'm 32, but our generation, I guess we're still all kind of in close generation. And what's the most important thing that our generation talks about? It's climate change, right? Can't go two can't go 2 minutes without climate change coming into the conversation. It's kind of like Trump in that way. And so I thought that the most important thing that I could be working on and and how I wanted to live my life was focused on the most important challenges. So yeah, I mean, listen, when I started this research institute, the Energy Impact Center, we were just focused on understanding climate change. What does the media have right about it? What does it have wrong about it? And you alluded to it in the intro that we put a lot of our effort into nuclear energy, and I can explain how we got there. But to answer your question, climate change is important. Robots were fun, climate change is important, and that's why I'm on climate change now.
Mm, okay. So something you just brushed past earlier while you were talking about your background with robotics is kind of changing the public perception behind what drones were used for, because drones were in people's minds was a tool for war, and you're trying to turn it into something more industrial and more of a consumer product. So I think that's where nuclear comes into play. So how did you guys transition from researching climate change and getting to the point where you started to become an advocate for nuclear energy?
Yeah, so the first thing that we did was try to characterize what is the climate change problem, right? And the climate change problem, although most people think it's getting to zero new emissions across the world, in every sector, that's not the climate change problem. Getting to zero new emissions leaves you at the same rate of warming that we're at today, approximately 3 watts per square meter of what they call radiative forcing. You don't stop climate change. You don't stop adding heat to the system until you remove the 1,000 gigatons of CO2 that we emitted over the last 200 years. So that's the problem that needs to be solved, not get to zero new emissions. And when you look at the differences between the tools that you can use to get to zero new emissions versus truly go negative, pull carbon out of the air, it's just a completely different story. Um, I'll give you, for instance, efficiency, right? Efficiency is an amazing tool to getting towards zero new emissions, right? Obviously, can't get all the way there, but it can help, but it can never go negative. You can never remove carbon from the air using efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
And the same applies to any power source where when producing that power source, it emits more carbon than that power source could ever capture. So if you run the calculations on every single power source, whether it's tidal or combined cycle natural gas or wind or solar, whatever it is, every single power source has a carbon footprint, and it has to produce enough power to totally account for that carbon footprint. And when you run those numbers, the only one that even comes close is nuclear energy. So that's why we decided to focus on nuclear energy to fully account for past carbon emissions. So eventually we could stop climate change.
That is quite a fascinating transition, and it sounds like a very logical transition as well. It like you started with a problem, and then you started walking back what the challenges were, and this was the solution you arrived at. So a little bit more about nuclear energy. Like the largest,
Yeah, that's what
yeah.
all engineers should
But that's the interesting thing, though. Like most of the time with climate change discussions, especially the ones I have, it's not everybody usually takes the angle of rational entrepreneurial, let's just solve this problem. Everybody has like a side. It's like you're supporting a sports team. Like you're going to support the sports team if it's losing or if it's not losing. And I think that has shaped largely how we talk about climate change. And then it's kind of like coal versus natural gas. You have renewables versus nuclear, and this is how we are going right now. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that, but you have to understand that's because most people don't actually give a shit about climate change. Most people care about promoting whatever they want to promote. I mean, you see this right now in the discussion of, let's say, like the Green New Deal, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Green New Deal isn't about climate change; it's about social programs, and then they've come up with some justification for why those two are related. Oh, we need to, like these communities have been hurt historically by energy, so we need to make sure they're not left out of the transition. I mean, don't get me wrong, that is a very worthy goal, and you should do that. But it really doesn't have much to do with climate change. It's just using climate change to advocate for other things that are important to you. And that's what everyone does, including nuclear people, too, by the way. Nuclear people also use climate change to promote their technology. Solar people do, wind people do, even natural gas people say, hey, we're not as bad as coal. But you have to understand, uh, yeah, nobody actually cares about climate change. Everyone cares about promoting whatever their team is. That's the reality of what we deal with today. And you know what? Because that's true, maybe we should give the climate change deniers a little bit of slack. Maybe we shouldn't be so dismissive of them because what they're doing is they're promoting their values, which is generally, not have a lot of social change, not have a lot of um, spending on things that might not actually make sense or that might go into the pockets of, corrupt bureaucrats. Uh, that's their values. And then the solar people are like, well, I want to promote solar stuff. So that's their values. Everyone's just promoting their own values and no one's really paying attention to the science. And I'll take this even one step further. The researchers, a lot of the climate change researchers, I don't even think a lot of them care so much about climate change. Their number one priority is to direct more funds to their research labs, right? Their number one priority is to keep their job, right? To put food on the table for their family. Uh, it's not to actually, address climate change, which is why a lot of times you see what's coming out of their mouths is just like overly scientific, overly jargony things because that's what they do as scientists. They're not actually trying to solve the problem. They're trying to promote their lab's
Mm.
research.
It's actually very interesting you bring that up because I think right now the fact that there's so many incentives on so many different sides of this conversation as what is it's part of the contributing reason why climate change has become such a strong political tool. Uh, I have quite an international audience. I don't know if everybody would follow this analogy, but just take the presidential race for instance on the Democratic side because I watched a few of their the town hall they did about climate change, and you hear them say some pretty very interesting things for lack of a better term, and you see people it's become such a large political movement that people are inclined to say some, let's say, not so factual things in order to get some, I don't know, points on the board or something like that. So I think that now that the conversation is moving in that direction, that puts nuclear in a very precarious spot because nuclear has a very long history, for better or for worse. And that brings us right now about the work that you're doing right now. So I think from where I stand, in the first episode of this podcast, I did a review of every energy source. And when it got to nuclear, I basically said that unless nuclear gets a huge PR boost, it's probably not going to be a large part of the energy mix in the future. So what do you think about that?
Uh, I mean, that's true in some places and totally not true in other places. Most places in the world, well, first of all, most people in the world do not know what nuclear is. Okay, so anyone who says the public perception is against nuclear doesn't know what they're talking about because most people, the majority of people, literally have no conception of what nuclear is. Out of the people who do know about it, you've got some who like it, some who are medium about it, and some who don't like it. And only in a few places has the people who really don't like it really been able to shut projects down. Massachusetts, California, Italy, Austria, some other parts of Europe, Germany, Australia, a few places. The majority of the world, and by the way, climate change is a global problem. Carbon is a global problem. It's a world problem. So we need to be thinking about the entire world here. The majority of the world is totally cool with it. Like the majority of the world sits in like a few places like India, China, and maybe some other regions, and they like nuclear and they're building nuclear and they're going to continue to build nuclear. So I wouldn't characterize nuclear so much as having public perception challenges, so much as the type of people like us who talk about it perceiving public
Mm.
perception
Okay,
challenges.
so now what do you think the real challenges for nuclear are? Because just a quick detour before we jump into that. I was speaking with a friend earlier, and I told her that I'm having an interview about nuclear for the first time on the podcast, and the first thing she said, literally, the first thing she said was, "Why are you talking about weapons on an energy podcast?" And I think,
Right, right. So that goes to people who don't know what most people don't know what nuclear is. Even a bunch of educated people have no idea what nuclear is, which is great for the industry, right? Because then you've got tabula rasa, blank slate. Build their perception how you want it to be built.
mm-hmm. So could just give an introduction of nuclear energy and the challenges you think right now that nuclear energy faces as it progresses through its a very long and very uh, dramatic lifeline,
Yeah.
a timeline.
Um, Nuclear energy has five problems: economics, 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 economics. Those are the only five problems that nuclear has. And so throughout history, if you've seen nuclear being built or not being built, it 100% comes down to economics. Are the markets set up to reward nuclear for its characteristics and what it does and how it delivers power to the grid? Or are the markets not set up for that? Are the developers who develop projects, are they able to build them cost effectively? Or are they not able to build them cost effectively? This is the only thing really that starts up and shuts down and commissions nuclear projects. Economics, 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 economics.
Mm. So I think very, very relevantly, where you guys stand with the Energy Impact Institute is to really tackle this economics problem and basically find a way to innovate with nuclear energy and drive those costs down. Because while I was preparing for the show, I kind of like just searched for how nuclear has progressed through the years, and it's basically been at a standstill in terms of new electrical production from nuclear plants since about, when was it, in the 1960s, the 1970s, and that's a very, very it's been very small increases since then, and it has lots of reasons for that. But if it's the economic side, why haven't people been incentivized to really like every other form of energy, like solar, for instance? The price has gone drastically down, and it's still not in the place where it needs to be, but there's been some progressions in that place, and in turn the market has responded by allowing new solar projects to go up, especially in like rural areas and places that don't have a lot of like large wealth in the community. So why isn't there been more innovations in the nuclear space to really drive those costs down and to bring the next generation of nuclear power plants?
Yeah. Okay. So you threw a lot at me there, but I'll try to pick off the last question at least. Why hasn't there been more innovation in the nuclear sector? Um, there has been a lot of innovation in the nuclear sector, but my claim is that people are tackling the wrong problem. Uh, they're not making cheaper nuclear. That's the only thing that they need to do. If you want to sell a ton of nuclear, if you want to become the most prolific energy technology in the world, you have to make it less expensive. And then people will buy it and you can build new projects. There are a lot of reasons and a lot of ways that the industry has screwed up to make nuclear more and more expensive over time. You're right. In the 70s, they built over 100 of them in the U.S. and then France and Sweden and South Korea. I mean, some of these countries just built so many projects so quickly, it's like mind-boggling. And then what happens is they started making them too expensive. And there's a lot of reasons why they made them too expensive and a lot of ways that they made them too expensive. But when they made them too expensive, the projects got canceled, they shut down, and that's in that. And they didn't sell more. And then some new, market mechanisms came up in, the mid 2000s in the US, and they started, new projects in South Carolina and Georgia because they were able to change the market. They changed the contracting structure for which they could allocate capital towards new nuclear projects, and they got a few off the ground. And then, one of them, due to very poor construction management, became too expensive and it got shut down. Once again, economics. And then the other one, they're able to allocate more capital to and keep their financing structure in place and change a few things up and get ratepayers to keep paying for it. And so they're continuing to build it. Once again, economics. It always comes down to economics.
Mm. Do you think a contributing factor to this is because nuclear has so many smart people, they tend to ignore the more consumer side of it and focus too much on the technology and on the other stuff?
You're very astute. I'm actually curious to where you derived that thesis from because I've arrived at a very similar conclusion. Too many smart people. Where did you
Uh,
Where did you come up?
I listened to a few of the earlier podcasts of the Titans of Nuclear, and it just seemed like something that just kept coming up, and I was like, if they know this, if they know that they're lacking and they know they don't have the entrepreneurial spirit to really push for this and not just rely on the fact that, oh, it's so good and we don't have to worry about anything else, people will just realize that and just really focus on this economic aspect that you're talking about. So actually, to just add into this, I think it was an interview with Todd Allen that you had, and you were talking about how we talk about nuclear and we talk about it's less dangerous, it's not as bad, and like it's kind of like describing a less appealing boyfriend or something like that. And I think that that really goes to show with how nuclear is a talked about and b how it sounds to other people, because it's kind of I'll I'll just let you talk about this right now because I'm very curious to hear what you have to say.
Yeah. So okay. So for your audience, yeah, you were alluding to my podcast, the Titans of Nuclear podcast series, where we interview hundreds and thousands, really now at this point, of experts across the nuclear industry, and this is where we get most of our research and information from. And Yeah, I mean, yeah, in that episode with Todd Allen, I think that was probably in the first 3 episodes or so he was on the show, and Todd's been mentored me in a lot of ways, and it's really taught me a lot about the industry and introduced me to a ton of people, and he's just so smart, and like he just totally he's like pointed me in the right direction, and he's doing amazing things with the University of Michigan now to help really change and foster innovation in the space. So Todd Allen's he's a real hero. And one of the things that he taught me pretty early on um, was that the nuclear industry loves to talk about, oh, we're less dangerous than this. It's like, why are you even talking about that? Like, the only reason that safety has become a concern is because they won't shut up about it. Like, the nuclear industry will not stop talking about it, and that's why people are scared of it. And then because people get scared of it, then they ask their politicians, "Hey, can you make sure that they're adding more safety stuff in these plants?" And then the nuclear industry is like, "Okay, we'll do it. Yeah, we're smart. We can add more stuff if you want us to add more stuff." And then when you add more safety stuff, people get more scared of it because it's like it's got this giant concrete dome on it. And it's got 100 armed security guards with like these like AR-15 style rifles. Like, for what? Like, what's the worst that could happen if something went wrong in the nuclear plant? No one would die, right? Zero people. Fukushima, three of them, totally melted down, and these are one of the largest, power plants out there. Three total core meltdowns, and not a single person was hurt even a little bit. Yet the industry, reacts to it in a way that people think it's hurt. You probably thought that thousands of people died at Fukushima. Many people probably thought that.
It would sound like that the way especially the way the media portrays it as such a huge disaster. Uh, it's actually very interesting because before this, I thought that nuclear waste disposal was a big issue, and that was my impression of it until I started researching it. And I was like, oh wow, it's actually pretty like they know what they're doing,
Yeah,
and it's actually not an issue, but
yeah.
I don't know if it's the way the media reports it or like you see movies about radiation and video games that have their whole storyline about a huge nuclear fallout, and these things don't help, I think.
Yeah, they don't help, but where do they come from? They come from the nuclear industry saying that they'll take care of it instead of saying, "Don't worry about it. You're being ridiculous." And like people, and then people aren't really being ridiculous because then they hear that from the nuclear industry, and then they're almost justified in their concerns. But it's just so crazy because in the objective reality is that a meltdown doesn't hurt anybody. It's less dangerous than you tripping down your staircase, and nuclear waste has never hurt a person, place, or thing in all human history. So it's like the things that people are most scared of in their minds. And once again, most people don't know what nuclear energy is. This is just like the very well educated, the elite. These people are scared of nuclear because whenever they express their concerns to the nuclear industry responds with, "Well, we'll take care of it. We'll take care of it," instead of saying, "Shut up. That's not a concern. Like, you're being ridiculous."
So I think this is where the podcast stand, because when I discovered the podcast, it was the first time I ever heard anybody like call themselves an advocate of nuclear. And I think you mentioned one time that nuclear needs its own defenders because it's not going to stand up for itself or something along those lines. And that really struck me, and that really made me want to research more into what nuclear is. And you have organizations like like the Greenpeace, for instance, and they have an entire page on their website that basically says that nuclear is dirty. It basically says a lot of things that if you research, they're not factually true, at least to very large degrees. And these things still exist, and public discourse kind of like pushes in that direction. So especially when people say that nuclear is not a clean energy source, which is, as you would know, quite mind boggling to anybody who would bother to read about it. Why do you think it's still a problem right now before we move on to another topic?
I mean, you're throwing a few things out at there. Greenpeace, it's like, I mean, those people are like crazy. I mean, like, you see what they do. I think they even shot a bazooka at a nuclear plant once. Like, they're crazy. Um, and so, like, anyone who listens to Greenpeace, I mean, like, I get it. You're an environmental person. You care about the environment. You heard about that organization. You look at their values. They seem to align with yours. You give them a little bit of money. Okay, you're on their side. But if you really look into what they're doing, like, it's not a good organization. Like, there's so many other amazing environmental organizations out there. Like, find a different one. So that's my piece on Greenpeace. And then, yeah, you said they're still putting out bad information about nuclear there. Yeah, so what? People put out bad information about vaccines. People put bad information out about chemicals that don't hurt people. People put bad information about so many things. The key isn't to stop people from putting bad information out there. The key is don't overreact to it, right? Just do what you do best that people value, and that should be produce cheap energy. Once again, economics, 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 economics.
Hmm. Okay. So I would like to now talk about innovations that have come up in the nuclear space because unlike it's like nuclear is way less popular if it's like a high school setting than let's say solar, for instance. So people don't really hear about all the amazing things that are happening in the nuclear space, and there are pretty amazing things happening in the nuclear space. So could you just tell about the now, but let's talk about the positives that have been happening on the technological side in terms of innovation, and as far as policy in terms of like successfully pushing for, um, maybe I don't know. You could just take it out and just talk about the technology and the policy development in the last few years for nuclear.
Yeah. Um, so I can mostly speak to in the U.S. what's happening, though that as part of my travels, I think I've been to 12 different countries now, visited over 100 different research facilities, startups, labs, universities, you name it. But every now and then I still find something new that's happening that's also pretty amazing. Yeah, I mean, listen, you've got hundreds of thousands of people who work in the nuclear sector. There are bound to be some that are entrepreneurial and want to do things different and want to innovate. And the result of that has been about 50 different nuclear startups that have emerged just in the last 5 years or so. They're trying a lot of different paths forward. They're messing with the physics, the chemistry, construction schedule, you name it. I think they're all working towards the right goal, which is bring nuclear, bring a new nuclear to the market in a way that that you can get to the market fast and cheap, right? Some are doing a better job than others. Some still say that they'll take 10 years to get to the market. I think any startup that says it's going to take 10 years to get to the market, you can just shut down the company right now. Sorry, not worth pursuing. No matter how great your technology is, just it's not the right mindset. There are others who are trying to get to the market faster, 5 years or less. And to them, I say, yeah, go for it. And as long as you're focused, your number one criteria, your number one design criteria for a nuclear plant is deliver electrons cheaply, um, then you've got a pretty good shot at success. And we do as an organization is we try to promote them, we try to advocate for them, we try to bring them to the world stage, we try to introduce them to customers, we try to introduce them to financiers, and I think within just a few years, you'll see one of these newer startup technology companies in the nuclear space bring a product to market and really change the way that the world thinks about
That's
energy.
very interesting to hear. One more thing that you kind of mentioned before while you were speaking is the role that nuclear energy plays in terms of decarbonization of the atmosphere. And I don't think that's something that gets talked about too often. And it's very interesting as well because even though, let's say you have a technology like carbon capture and storage, and you have environmentalist groups protesting against that technology because they say that it's going to incentivize um, all companies and coal companies to stay in operations for longer. And yet, you look at the climate reports, and it's like we need to take away a lot more carbon in the atmosphere than we actually pump out into it. So we need technologies like that, and that just makes you stop and think that why isn't this something that's getting talked about? And going forward, what strong role do you see nuclear playing in terms of decarbonization?
Yeah, anyone who's against carbon capture is totally full of shit. They're an absolute hypocrite. Um, what don't people like about coal? People don't like the emissions of coal. So if you can totally account for the emissions, and I mean totally account for it, yeah, what's wrong with continuing to burn coal, right? If by definition you've negated its negative consequences with complete capture, then you should like coal, right? Oh, I'm sorry that you hate fossil fuels so much because your tribe hates them, but like think about it, everything that you love about a prosperous society today was built upon fossil fuels. And I mean everything: medicine, building, foods. movement of people and goods and services, everything is built upon fossil fuels. So although, yeah, they're destroying the planet, we should also give them credit for virtually all of human prosperity. And if you can find a way to get rid of their negative consequences, then you should love them as well. So these people who don't like carbon capture, once again, they're just speaking to their emotional values, and they're not actually trying to solve climate change. Carbon capture, the only problem that exists with carbon capture today is when you hook it up to a fossil plant, it makes it so economically uncompetitive. It takes away so much of the energy. It makes it almost not worth it to use it. But if that technology improves over time and you can continue to burn fossil fuels in a completely neutral way, that should be fine. Now, I'm not advocating for that because nuclear can do it all. I'm advocating for nuclear powering society in a way that doesn't create emissions, and then using extra nuclear energy to then power direct air capture and remove the previous emissions from the air. That's the type of carbon capture system that I see as being most effective.
Okay, so going forward, do you see it being an application, and how soon do you think stuff like this can go away from us talking about it and for us actually seeing it? And I know because most people don't realize, but there are actually lots of countries with nuclear plants that have been operating very safely for lots and lots of years now, and nuclear actually.
Why did you say safely there? Why did you
I'm
inject?
sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, seriously, because it's like if it's not a concern, it shouldn't be a concern. You saying it like that, you interjecting there, you made it a concern in people's minds. So even though it's a good word, right, safe, what you did is you put a bad image in people's heads. So you should understand the psychology behind using words like that if you want to promote a
That's very
specific
true. So
energy
I'll
source.
be very careful about that. And that just shows how subconscious it can be sometimes.
No, it's okay. It is. It is. I'm giving you a hard time, but literally everyone in the nuclear sector does that, and that's why everyone hates nuclear because they won't
Okay.
shut up about
So
safety.
a lot of countries have nuclear plants that have been operating for a very long time. And it contributes to about 10% of the
Yeah.
world's energy output. And that might seem small, but when you consider that most of the nuclear plants are operating mainly North America, Europe, and China, and you see the kind of percentage they produce, the the percentage goes way higher. And these are places that have been enjoying the benefits of nuclear, although it has its challenges, but it's still been in operation and it's still going forward strong. And you have lots of people who are really passionate about the industry and really intelligent and smart. And you have hopefully more entrepreneurs like getting into the industry and trying to like make it more competitive right now. And you have people who are talking about it like you. So how soon do you think we can see a change in the public discourse surrounding nuclear and have it go into other regions, not just in North America, not just in Europe, and away from China as well, and really go out into the rest of the world? Because I think that once we reach a stage where it becomes more economically viable, and you have more people having incentives to go to university to study nuclear engineering, that is where we're going to see large exponential growth once again in the nuclear industry. And I'd like you to talk about that.
Yeah, I'll pull apart a couple things that you said there. I mean, I agree. The minute that it's cheap enough to deploy it in any given part of the world, markets will deploy it in any given part of the world. People need energy. People want energy, and this is an energy source that there's no air pollution associated with it. So it's just amazing in every way. And there's also a virtually infinite supply of uranium in the ocean, right? So just imagine this: an energy source that can produce as much power as you want, um, that the fuel, you don't even have to mine anything to get the fuel, uh, and doesn't have any air pollution. I mean, what could be a more perfect energy source? And that's not even talk about climate change. Let's just talk about satisfying people's energy demands. So yeah, so once it becomes cheaper, and these are the two sides of economics, right? It's can you produce the power, the levelized cost of electricity cheaper than other power sources, which makes people want it, makes it compete on competitive markets. And then the other half to economics is can you build it cheap enough? Is the total capital outlay such that a small or developing country can afford it, that they can allocate the money to actually build the thing before you start getting the value from it, the electrons from it. So those are the two sides to economics. And once you're able to bring the cost down enough, you'll see it spread across the world. literally as fast as any good can spread across the world. I mean, how fast can you distribute iPhones to the entire world, right? That's what capital markets are amazing at, and that's what can happen with nuclear too once it becomes cheap enough. You mentioned something about nuclear engineers there. Believe it or not, a nuclear power plant doesn't really require nuclear engineers to run it. Um, it's mostly mechanical and chemical, electrical, and then a bunch of operations and technicians. The nuclear engineer part was pretty much figured out 60 years ago, and what nuclear engineers now do today is design fuel. But nuclear fuel companies can scale to support that growth worldwide. So you don't even really need to build up that robust of a nuclear talent supply chain in order for these things to be spread across the world. You just need to make them cheap.
Hmm. Okay, that paints a very optimistic and very hopeful future for nuclear, and I'm sure that's exactly what you stand for, and you've made it very clear with your podcast and with how you've gone through the past few years. One more thing I'd like to draw as a slight parallel to do you find it difficult sometimes to talk about what you do nuclear in an interview I had? I was speaking to a lady named Laura, and she just finished a PhD from Stanford, and she works with BP, and she does basically her job entails her searching for gas hydrates that can in the future give us a large deposit of natural gas, and she works as a geologist. And she mentioned that since she is in California, it's a very liberal society. She finds it difficult to talk about what she does sometimes, and because the people have a large hate for fossil fuel companies and for oil companies and for anything that relates to natural gas. And even though they drive cars and they fly and they have products made from the fossil fuel industry, do you have problems like that? And what's your advice for, let's say, young people who want to get into the nuclear industry and to really start their career there and help solve these problems and drive for a clean energy future with low emissions and meet up with climate change?
Okay, so your first question was, do you find it hard to talk with people? And the answer is no. I enjoy talking with people, whether I agree with them or disagree with them on anything. And I think that's like a broader skill that people need to develop. You can always find things to disagree with someone else on. No one has the exact same set of values or the exact same opinions, and so a conversation with anyone on any subject could potentially turn into an argument. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't talk to people. Like, people are awesome to talk to. It's a lot of fun. So you just have to find a way to have a conversation in a manner where you can express your differences and learn from each other. And so when it comes to the energy sector, I try to do that. When it comes to all sorts of hot topics, gun control, abortion, whatever it might be, everyone's got a different opinion. They got a different take, and it's always an opportunity to learn and get to know somebody. Um, and, just, when you talk to people, it doesn't have to be about convincing them of something, right? It can, you can just talk to people. Obviously, learning, in my opinion, is the greatest thing that you can get out of any conversation, but it doesn't have to be learning either. You can just learn how to talk to people in a way that you just have a pleasant conversation also. So, people who express frustration, like your friend do, I think they just have to not take it so seriously. Obviously, the work that they do is very important, but that doesn't mean that they have to, get upset when a conversation turns confrontational. They just have to, figure out a way to, have a pleasant conversation with people.
Mm, okay. So, going forward, for the young people who want to get into the industry, what would you like them to start reading about, or people who just want to learn more about nuclear? Aside from, of course, listening to the Titans of Nuclear podcast, which is a brilliant podcast, by the way, and I encourage anyone to listen to it. Where do you encourage people to start to really start to dispel some of the myths and some of the unpleasant things that they've heard about nuclear energy and really start to learn the real facts about what nuclear has to offer?
Don't learn about nuclear energy. Like, learn about energy, and make your own decision. Or learn about engineering, and through the lens of an engineer, try to look at energy. Or learn about a bunch of things. Learn about engineering. Learn about finance. Learn about entrepreneurship. Uh, it's almost like what I see a lot of people try to do in problem solving in general is they jump into tactics too quickly. Like, so I got this podcast, right? And people are always asking me, how do you make a podcast, or how do you market it to your audience, or how do you find a podcast audio editor? All these types of things people ask. I'm like, you're too far ahead of yourself. You're looking at tactics now. Why do you want to make a podcast? Should be the question that you're asking yourself. And the same comes with anything you want to learn. Figure out why you want to learn something. Become motivated, and then you'll be able to learn about anything that you want. You want to learn about nuclear energy? You can find podcasts on it. You can read books. You can do. You can show up at a university. You can have a conversation with a professor. You can email someone. Like, there's a million different tactics. The question is, figure out, who you are and how you want to spend your time, and what you want to learn. And then everything else, the tactics are the easy part. You'll figure it out from there. You'll Google it.
Wow, what a conversation that was. I think that's a good way to start us off on different energy sources. So far we've spoken a lot about renewables, we've spoken a decent bit about oil and gas, and this is the first time we're really branching off. We also spoke about gas hydrates at some point with Laura, and now we're talking about nuclear energy, because I think this really shapes the idea of what this podcast is and why this podcast exists. When I started off this, I really wanted to be a platform where people can hear about different parts of the energy industry. That's why one week we have a climate activist, and another week we have a businessman in the oil and gas industry, and then we have someone who is into renewables and someone who is into energy policy, because having a very broad look about what the problems are and having a good understanding of who exactly are trying to solve these problems in different ways helps us to better appreciate the effort that goes into it and just how complex these issues are. And I'm not saying that because it's complex we should fold our hands and do nothing. No, I would never advocate for that. But we need to realize that in order to solve our problems, we need to be creative, and we need as many people as possible, because collaboration is the end goal. And we really need to be sure about what the aim is. The aim is to reduce emissions and to give us a future where we have clean, sustainable energy that everyone can have. If you're in the West, that's Europe or America. If you're in Africa, if you're in Asia, everyone deserves at this point to have clean, accessible energy, because it just gives you the ability to do everything else. So I hope you enjoyed this first conversation about nuclear energy. If this is your first time to the podcast, consider subscribing. We do this every week. Leave us a review wherever you're listening, and join us next week for another conversation. And just as a quick hint about what it's going to be about, we're going back to activism. So I would look forward to seeing you guys there again. Have a wonderful week. This has been your host, Olubunmi Olajide, signing off.